DoorDash customers, GrubHub customers, UberEats customers, Instacart customers, or Waiter/BiteSquad customers? Which customers you think are the better tippers? Let's talk about it on this segment of the Gig Geezer. As you can tell, it is somewhat later in the day with me attempting to do this segment of the Gig Geezer. That's because my day was somewhat interrupted by the fact I had some insurance agent duties to do today, and it just spilled over. But what I want to talk about is customer tipping habits. Which customers on these apps are the better tippers? DoorDash, GrubHub, UberEats, BiteSquad, Instacart, BiteSquad/Waiter, Instacart. Now, I feel that I am qualified to do something like this based on the fact that I'm out here averaging about 45 hours a week doing my hustles. I have averaged over $200 a day in gig economy hustle over the last couple of years, dating back to April 2020. And in 2022 specifically, I have averaged over $1,415 each week. And so the sample, this is not a scientific sample. These are numbers that are not compiled over numerous drivers and their customers. This is just simply my customers based on earnings based on the week ending January 31st through February 27th. So it's the recent 5 weeks. But these are some of the observations that I've noticed in that time. Now, DoorDash was the leading earner in that time for me with $2,228.12. Customers tipped during that time $1,566.44. And that accounted for about 70% of my earnings on DoorDash, that is. UberEats was second during that same period, $2,029.58. Customers tipped $1,019.81, which accounted for just over 50%, specifically 50.24%. Instacart was third, $833.22, of which $447.57 were by customer tips, which accounted for 53.71%. Then there was Waiter/BiteSquad, $655.40, of which customers tipped $298.46. Lastly was GrubHub. GrubHub, my earnings was $562.32, of which customers tipped $336.93, and that accounted for 59.91% of tips. Overall, I earned during that same period $6,318.64, of which $3,569.21 was accounted by customer tips, or about 58.06%, just shy of 60%. Percentage-wise, DoorDash customers was the leader at 70.30%. Second, surprisingly, was GrubHub, 59.91%. Third was Instacart customers at 53.71%. UberEats customers was next at 50.24%. Waiter/BiteSquad customers were next at 45.53%. And again, the overall percentage of customer tips to my earnings was 58.06%. Before we get any further, I certainly welcome your comments in the section below about your customers and how they tip in your market on the apps that you work. Also, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, and share my content among others. Now, what are some of the correlations that I noticed? I noticed that the company that contributed the least or contributed less, the customers actually tipped more in percentage, and those companies were DoorDash and GrubHub. I also observed that the companies that contributed the most, the customers seemed to tip the least. That was Waiter/BiteSquad. And then the companies in which there was somewhat of a fairly even distribution in which customer tips and cost and company contributions were almost equal, those companies were UberEats and Instacart. And by the way, with those two companies, what is interesting is that those are the companies in which customers are empowered to either increase tips or decrease tips, in that they can take away all or part of the tips after delivery. Now, I've mentioned in previous segments of the Gig Geezer that I believe that 60 to 70% of what we make are derived by customer tips. And actually, that's pretty close when I meant with the number of 58.06% of my earnings have come by customer tips during this period that I'm mentioning. The only surprise that I noticed in all this, and I kind of hinted it earlier, is that the company in which I've earned the least over this time is GrubHub. The customers actually tip a rather high percentage in relation to, or in comparison to, the other apps, in that customers tip just a tick under 60% of the money that I've made. Now, for also what's said about DoorDash and its steady volume of trash orders that we get throughout our hustles, DoorDash is the one that's leading the way. DoorDash also is number one in terms of market share in the United States, in that it comprises 58% of the food delivery market. Second is UberEats / Postmates. Third is GrubHub at 14%. Ironically, GrubHub at one time, as late as 2, maybe 3 years ago, was number one, and now they're third at 14%. And then the remaining companies that comprise the 1%, among those is Waiter / BiteSquad. Now, another thing that I've mentioned about in recent segments of the Gig Geezer are hidden tips and unicorns. And what I found was interesting is that I experienced both during my hustle today on DoorDash. My first 2 deliveries today were perfect examples of unicorn and tips. My first delivery was an offer, 24 items, $17.25 at DePrados. It was going to a business in the northeast sector of Colombia, and it happened to be a business that I've delivered to on multiple occasions. I also noticed that this company also tips well. Doesn't matter wherever they buy orders, wherever their orders are from, they tend to tip well. Well, upon hitting that complete delivery button, I noticed that the customer or the company tipped $59.50. That's your unicorn. The total payout was $64.45. Now, the second order of the day was a stacked Fazoli's order, offer of $16, 12 items total. One was going to a residence, the other was going to an attorney's office. As it turned out, the order to the residence was to a residence that I delivered to previously. Nothing really spectacular about their tipping, but the actual payout was actually slightly more. It was $8.50. But the pleasant surprise was from the attorney's office, because it's been my experience that attorney offices, it's a kind of a coin flip. They may tip well and they may not tip well. These people happen to tip well. Well, that payout for their order was $13.50. And so the total payout was $22. Classic case of hidden tip. Since this will not be a very long segment of the Gig Geezer, what I do encourage you to do is to go back through your numbers. Go back to your numbers. If you have GrubHub, you're only going to be able to go back the previous 5 weeks unless you've kept meticulous numbers. But go back over your previous 5 weeks over your apps and look at the total amount of money that you made according to the app, and then look at the total amount of tip money that you got on those apps. And, since this is all market related, it may give you an idea of which customers are the better tipping customers. Now, should this affect your decision in accepting orders? I don't think it should, but it's definitely something to think about while you're out there. And with that, this is another segment of the Gig Geezer. I'm in Wood Lane, and as always, may your hustle continue. Thank you for checking out this segment of the Gig Geezer. If you reach this point, it means that you've checked it out in its entirety, and it's very much appreciated, and it tells YouTube that you're very much engaged in my content. Hey, if you'd like to get in contact with me or pass on some other useful information, I can be reached at giggeezer3.5 @gmail.com, or you can check me out on Twitter at GigGeezer.